Well, everyone, it's time for us to finally go ahead and take a look at the Nintendo 3DS and compare it against the Nintendo DS and see how both of these consoles kind of compare in 2025. Now, the number one thing to keep in mind here is that I really do love both these consoles, but they are both very different. The Nintendo DS is a very interesting console that kind of kickstarted the whole entire dual screen side that Nintendo made. Now, the 3DS is an extension from the 3DS, but I've always felt like the 3DS is such a different console than the Nintendo DS. And this might sound crazy, but I kind of do still feel like the 3DS is closer to the Nintendo Switch than the 3DS is closer to the DS. I know that sounds crazy, but just from like the graphics, the gaming library, the similarity between the software, it was very similar between the 3DS and the Switch, then the 3DS and the DS. It's almost like a hybrid of the two. Now, the thing to keep in mind here is that the original Nintendo DS came out back in 2004. There was the DS Lite that came out shortly after. That's the one that I typically played with, and I loved my Nintendo DS Lite. There were so many features going on with that particular console, and even the jump from the Nintendo DS to the DSi, that was massive change. That was one of the biggest changes ever. But then we got the 3DS, which came out in 2011, and this added a little bit more flavor to the console. Now, the biggest thing the 3DS brought is that a lot of people would say is probably the 3D feature and the 3D toggle, but that isn't even the thing that's aged the best for that console. I think one of the coolest things that the 3DS ended up bringing here was that joystick. So that joystick that came on, to the left side of that particular controller, that was something that was really cool that this console ended up bringing. And I really did think at that time, that was easily one of the coolest things going on for that particular console too. With the Nintendo DS, this was a big jump from the Game Boy Advance, and even the Game Boy Advance SP, and the fact that we were getting dual screens made the gameplay that much more immersed and made it really cool. Now, I think the switch over to the Nintendo Switch was a really good idea, but I really do like this middle gap with the 3DS, where they did end up making that top display bigger than the bottom display. With the DS, both displays were the same size, but the 3DS made us have that bigger display at the top, and that was actually something that was really cool going on for that particular console as well. So definitely when I take a look at that particular console, that was a really big jump up. But not everything is perfect here. The Nintendo DS did actually end up going through and have that Game Boy Advance slot at the bottom. That made all those Game Boy Advance games also backwards compatible with the DS. The 3DS could play all those 3DS games, but the 3DS was backwards compatible with all those DS games too. So there was a humongous library of games available for the 3DS. But if you wanted to play those Game Boy Advance games, your only option was to go ahead and either get some of those Game Boy Advance games that got ported over to the 3DS shop, the eShop inside of the 3DS, or you could actually buy the physical games on the DS. So that was kind of a good advantage for something like the Nintendo DS. But then that brings us to the software. The biggest advantage and one of the biggest improvements internally that 3DS brought beyond than just the performance increases was the software. The ability of having your own platform and having your own eShop, it gave you the capability of doing more than just owning the games and buying the games. It kind of gave us this whole platform inside of it, and I thought that was something that was really cool. With the eShop that shut down now, but with the eShop, you had that type of layout of basically buying these games straight from the eShop onto your 3DS. Before with the DS, I always had to go through and I had to go and buy my games and I had to go and put them inside of my device. I had to go to Walmart, GameStop, all these other places and buy these games. And that was fine, that was fine for the most part, but it got kind of annoying sometimes because you had to go through if my mom or dad wasn't going to drive me to the store, I couldn't buy those games. The 3DS made it a lot easier to go ahead and buy those games. So that was something that was really, really cool. And even with the virtual consoles, you could play classic NES, SNES, and Game Boy games inside of your 3DS. But the DS, you had that Game Boy Advance slot, which made it really easy to play those games too. So that was a really cool thing going on for that. And I really, really did enjoy my 3DS for having that type of capability. You also had local wireless and online multiplayer on both, but the 3DS's layout was a lot more immersed, like I mentioned before. And that one was the one that I think was giving you overall more capability when it came down to that side. If you're trying to find the console that was giving you more capability from a multiplayer standpoint, I think there was more of an online multiplayer community inside of the Nintendo 3DS than the DS at that time as well. And if you're kind of comparing the graphics, once again, the Nintendo 3DS's graphics were very, very good. There could be some games that you could make the case that could look like 3DS games. I've always felt like Super Mario 64 graphically looked really good on the Nintendo DS, but visually the 3DS games like Super Mario 3D Land, the Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time remake was available for the Nintendo 3DS as well. And you could make the argument that maybe there could have been some games that, could have been supported on the DS that could have been remixed as well, like 3D remakes. I will tell you, for the most part, the Nintendo 3DS definitely did a really, really good job when it came down to the performance and the graphics of those games as well. So that was another really cool thing going on for that console too. And the 3DS is not a perfect console, but there are still some really unique things that the 3DS brought over the DS. Another big thing was the camera layout. Randomly, the Nintendo 3DS had a camera layout that the DSi also had, and I always felt like this was something really random that the Nintendo kind of threw inside of these consoles. I think once again, if you were to go through and pick up your own device, again, you probably wouldn't be using a camera that much inside of your 3DS, so you would think, but you would actually be surprised that in a lot of ways and for a lot of people, when you'd actually go ahead and take a look at a 3DS, for it coming out in 2011, you have to remember that these types of consoles, for the most part, people were going through and they were essentially, buying these consoles, and the cameras were pretty much not the same as what you get inside of a phone though at that time, but it was still like kind of nice to have that type of camera. Like it was more like a feature than it would be like a con. It wasn't like how we looked at like, maybe like iPads or tablet cameras. It was kind of like an interesting thing for your device to have a camera. The Nintendo DS did not have that type of capability, but like I said, the DSi did. But on top of that, another really big thing for the Nintendo DS now is the fact that the DS is, I would say, much more available than the Nintendo 3DS. And what I mean by that is if you're going to go through and pick up a Nintendo DS, that type of console for the most part is kind of giving you, I think, an overall better experience kind of from a price per value standpoint. The Nintendo DS you can buy in a lot of different variants in a lot of ways for fairly cheap. The Nintendo DS or the Nintendo DS Lite, even the Nintendo DSi, these things aren't really, depending on, which one you buy in what condition, they might not be as expensive as you think. And the main reason for that is because those particular consoles, there were so many that were made that if you were to go through and pick up a device like that, you would probably end up getting one that's probably cheap, maybe some for parts, some that are working, but for the most part, some of them might be functioning. Whereas with the Nintendo 3DS, those are fairly expensive. Those ones have gone up in value quite a bit now. So if you're trying to buy a console and use it like for fun and all that stuff, I will tell you, the Nintendo 3DS is by far the one I would recommend a lot of people to go ahead and buy. That's a very good console. It still has a lot of games available. And the fact that a lot of these games haven't been ported over, the DS or 3DS games haven't been ported over to the Switch or any other console yet, it does make a lot of sense to go and still buy those consoles because there is still a lot of games and a lot of, value that you can still get from these consoles because there's still so many games available. Same thing with the DS. Now, unless the Switch 2 brings 3DS support and allows you to download a bunch of 3DS games, then these 3DSs and DSs are still going to be worth it because they, allow you to play these games that haven't quite been ported over to other consoles yet. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about this. Let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out, till then.